Hello, everybody. Welcome to week 6 of microeconomics. So, my plan this week is to do 3 videos. One is this agenda video, and then I'm going to try to do 2 shorter videos for Chapter 8. First one will deal with the first section of Chapter 8, which deals with the distinction between accounting and economic profits. And the second part will deal with all these different costs and the behavior of all these different costs. Short-run costs, long-run costs, variable cost, fixed cost, total cost, and marginal cost. Marginal cost is the important one, but anyways, we'll get there. Total cost and marginal cost. Okay, so by next Sunday, you have your 8th weekly study plan assignment due on the publisher's website, covering Chapter 8, so that's this week. And then the week after, you have your second quiz due, covering Chapters 5, 7, and 8. And then in next Thursday, you have the midterm, and I think all students except one are writing it in the afternoon, so it's on campus, I should say, what is this on campus? On campus, in Moodle, closed book, and there's a practice midterm in Moodle. And since we don't have any chapter next week, I won't post any videos. I won't have any agenda video nor a chapter video next week. We'll wait for the week after. And then the week after, we do 3 chapters in the same week, chapters 9, 10, and 11. They're all related. It sounds like a lot of work, but they're all related, and you'll see why, or see how, quite shortly. Okay, and this week we're off to Chapter 8. So I thought, just before we jump into Chapter 8, I thought I would try to give you some background about Chapter 8, because Chapter 8 provides some context, or it's the background for Chapters 9, 10, and 11. And Chapters 9, 10, and 11 are sort of the context of Chapter 8. So I'm going to try to give you a bit of an overview of what to expect over the next few chapters. You might not fully understand my full explanation at the moment, but once you're through Chapter 11, you'll see some themes that I'm going to try to highlight that might help you tie those chapters together. Okay, so we know from earlier chapters that in the ideal world of economics, equilibrium price, the prices and the quantities of goods that we see for sale in markets are determined by the intersection of the supply and the demand curves. But what we will find out very shortly here is that that's only true sometimes. It's not always true. And we're gonna learn why it's not always true in the next few chapters. So let's just so Chapter 8 is really a warm-up chapter to Chapters 9, 10, 11. And one thing that we're going to learn in Chapter 8, if you're not familiar with this already, and you probably are, one thing we learn in Chapter 8 is that the purpose of a company, the purpose of a business, the purpose of a firm is to maximize its profits. And profits are maximized when we have when the difference between total revenue and total cost is at a maximum point. So we learned this in Chapter 8. And then in Chapters 9, 10, and 11, economists effectively ask, is there a rule that specifies the profit maximizing quantity of output for a firm? And in Chapters 9, 10, 11, economists have an answer to that question. And their answer is, yes, there is a rule regarding the profit maximizing quantity of output, but it's only true for the most part. It's not universally true. So the rule is the profit maximizing quantity of output rule for an individual firm is It's the quantity of output where the firm's marginal revenue equals its marginal cost. But what we're going to see is that rule is only true in 3 classes of industries: so-called perfect competition, which we look at in Chapter 9, in monopoly, which we look at in Chapter 10, and in so-called monopolistic competition in Chapter 11. But this rule, this profit maximizing quantity of output, does not hold in the 4th class of industry called oligopoly, which we also look at in Chapter 11. So we won't try to explain why at the moment this rule doesn't hold in oligopoly, but that's what we're going to find out. Okay, so I've just identified these 4 classes of industries on the board here, and these are economic classifications of industries. And this way of classifying industries is a little bit different than what we normally think of when we speak of an industry. When we normally speak of an industry, whether it's in marketing class or in finance class or really just in ordinary life, we usually classify industries on the basis of what products they produce. And of course, when we say products, we mean either a good or a service. So I pulled some industry sectors off Yahoo Finance. And so these are kind of standard classifications of industries. So we have so-called basic materials. So basic materials means products that come out of the ground. So we have some agricultural products, like we have fertilizers that come out of the ground, aluminum comes out of the ground, copper, gold, oil and gas, industrial minerals like lead and zinc and stuff like that, oil and gas drilling and exploration, oil and gas equipment and services, oil and gas pipelines, refining and marketing, silver, iron and steel, and so on. And then, so there's any number of these classifications of industries based on different products. So we have consumer goods, so we have, we have appliance manufacturers, we have automotive companies, we have beverage producers, cigarette producers, dairy product producers, food producers, furniture producers, office equipment producers, recreational vehicle producers, We have all sorts of industrial products. And then we have financial industry, so we've got insurance, we have banks, we have trust companies, we have stockbrokers, la-di-da-di-da. Healthcare, hospitals, pharmaceuticals, drugs, industrial products, companies that make airplanes and cement and machinery, and so on. Come on. Oh, okay, then we have services, so we have industrial services, we have household services, we have technology, la-di-da-da. So these classifications of industries are all based on product type. But when economists classify industries, they come up with these 4 classes of industries: perfect competition, monopoly, monopolistic competition, and oligopoly. So, and they're not concerned about what kind of products they produce. They're concerned about how they generate profits. And so we know that profits are the difference between revenues and costs. So in Chapter 8, we're going to see that we're going to investigate the cost side of businesses. And what we're going to see is that the cost side of businesses is the same in all those 4 classes of industries. But where those industries differ is how they price their products and generate revenues. So we'll save that for Chapters 9 through 11. Anyway, so in Chapter 8 here, we're going to look at all these different types of costs in a business. We're going to look at variable costs and fixed costs and total costs and marginal costs. And when we come to Chapter 9, we'll start seeing that the profit maximizing quantity is where marginal revenues equals marginal cost. Okay, so we learned, just a second here, we learned in an earlier chapter that in equilibrium, the prices and the quantities of products that we see in a particular market are determined by the point where the demand and supply curves for that industry intersect. But what we're gonna find out in chapter 9 and 10 and 11 is that the price and quantity only equal the so-called equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity in a perfectly competitive industry. And what that means is it's only in perfect competition that the price and quantity are determined by the intersection of the demand and the supply curves. And that's not the case in these other industries. And what this means is that it's only in a perfectly competitive industry that economic profits are maximized at the point where the supply and demand curves intersect. I think from before we've probably intuitively thought that, or maybe we didn't think about it at all. We didn't think about how firms maximize their profits, but we're going to see that the only industry that maximizes its profits where the supply and demand curve intersect is a perfectly competitive industry. So economists use a perfectly competitive industry as I'm going to say as a benchmark for understanding how the other classes of industries operate. So that's why we look at perfect competition in chapter 9, because we're going to use that as our model. It's sort of our ideal model for evaluating why monopolies and monopolistic competition and oligopolies are not as economically ideal as perfect competition. Anyways, we'll get to that. Okay. Oh, and there's kind of an irony here. I should kind of point this out because you will pick it up. So, in perfect competition, the profit maximizing quantity is the point where the supply and demand curves intersect. However, it's ironic that in perfect competition, economic profits are zero. So the profit maximizing quantity in perfect competition has zero economic profits. But that's still a profit maximizing point because the profits are not negative. Zero is better than negative. Okay, and then what we're also going to see is that in the other industries, monopoly, monopolistic competition, and oligopoly, they can generate economic profits, but they're able to do so because I got a little bit of typo there. Their profit maximizing quantity is less than the point where the supply and the demand curves intersect, and the prices they charge are higher than what we'd expect at equilibrium. Anyways, so we'll get there. So I just have one final comment before we move into chapter 8 here, and I was just going to give you a heads up on how the numbers work in chapter 8. So in chapter 8, we have all these costs that we're dealing with, and we're dealing with average costs and total costs and marginal costs and the like. So the way the numbers work is there's a rule, and the rule is the marginal pulls the average to the side of the marginal. So when you're looking at these little diagrams of marginal costs and average costs, if you look at the little diagrams long enough, or if you look at the numbers behind the diagrams long enough, you'll discover this rule. And it's just a mathematical rule, really. It's it's nothing special to economics. So what it means is, so the marginal pulls the average to the side of the marginal. So if the marginal is less than the average, that means that the average is decreasing. And if the marginal is greater than the average, then the average is increasing. And if the marginal is equal to the average, then the average is at its minimum point. It's kind of it's just a quick little rule about how to understand these diagrams. We're going to be seeing lots of diagrams very shortly. And the marginal cost curve intersects the average at its minimum. Average, it could be average variable costs, or it could be average total costs. Doesn't matter. It's just the average. Anyways, I thought I'd give you a bit of a heads up there on this little principle. Maybe it won't help you at all, but okay, so that's it for the agenda, and we're off to chapter 8 in the next video. Oops, my little thing.